Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the candidate forum for Marble Falls ISD Place One. And we've got an election coming up in early May, and we've got I know we have Gary Boshears here with us, and we also have Sean Tucker is the sorry Tucker Edwards, pardon me, is the other candidate who was invited to attend but is not here. And just want to be sure that you all understand that I'm just hosting this as a service to the community. I am the justice of the peace, so I cannot take a position on the school board race, but wanted to give the candidates an opportunity to visit with you all and address them things. So, um, Mr. Boshears, if you'd like to unmute yourself and give us a little bit of a background of your background and what you hope to accomplish in the race and in your reelection to the school board if reelected.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay, Judge? I was having a couple little hardware issues there for a second.
Yes, likewise. I can hear you just fine.
All right, awesome. Yes, well, thank you, Judge, for hosting this, giving us the opportunity to visit with the community and answer some questions today. My name is Gary Boshears. I'm the incumbent running for place one on the school board. I've been on the school board for almost 9 years now, first elected in 2016 and then reelected in 2019 and 2022. Lived in Marble Falls for almost 30 years. My wife, Michelle, and I have been married for 16 years. We have three wonderful kids. Annie, who's about to be a senior at Texas State University, Garrett, who's a freshman at Marble Falls High School, and Grayson, who is in eighth grade at Marble Falls Middle School. I've worked in law enforcement almost my whole life, adult life, for almost 25 years now. And that's given me a really interesting perspective when it comes to the school board, especially on safety and security and things like that. That's one of the topics that I'm really passionate about. If I'm enough to be reelected, I really just want to focus on, making sure the district operates in a fiscally conservative manner and advocating for the rights of parents and advocating for teachers and students. Those are kind of my big things.
Very good. I've got a few questions that people sent in to me, and if anyone online has any questions they would also like to have us consider, would you put them in the group chat, and I'll take a look at them as they come in. But Gary, let me just kind of hit a few of the questions that are here. One is, and this is a really broad one, but you can probably distill it down for people. But the question is, can you explain in detail about the school district's finances? Where does the money come from? Where does it mostly go? What's the need for the bond proposal before us? How are y'all coping with the loss of the last bond issue? That sort of thing.
Yeah, we could probably spend the whole hour discussing school finance.
Easily.
It's a kind of an intricate topic, but I'll try to do about a 2 minute version. So, most of
Perfect.
the district's finances are supported through local property taxes as well as funding from the state of Texas. We do get a little bit of funding from the federal government as well. It's not much, it's like less than $1 million. So, most of it is from local property taxes and again from the state of Texas. And when you get your property tax bill, when you see the rate on there for Marble Falls ISD, that rate is actually comprised of two numbers, one being the M&O, the maintenance and operations, and the other one being the INS, the interest and sinking. The best analogy that I can use is the M&O is that kind of pays for the daily operations. That pays for things like salary, gas, paper, things like that. The INS pays for debt. That's actually the only thing that the INS can be used for is to make payments on debt. So that pays for outstanding bonds that the district has. And we've been fortunate in the last several years that we've actually been able to pay off quite a bit of the district's debt early. And what's interesting is we do get funding from the state, but we also have to send money back to the state. We're a district, it falls under the Robin Hood law or recapture. And this year, the district will actually send about $14.4 million in local property taxes back to the state. Now, Judge, you asked about the election back in November. So the election back in November was for a voter approved tax rate. The state allows school districts to add so many, what is kind of a term for it is golden pennies to their tax rate. So if the voters approve it, the district can add so many of these golden pennies to their tax rate. And the good thing about that for the district is those pennies on the M&O rate are not subject to recapture. So the district already has a few of those. It's about 5 2/3 of those on the M&O rate, and the state allows districts to go up to 8. So the issue back in November wasn't a bond election; it was a voter-approved tax rate election, which would have added about an additional 2 1/3 of those golden pennies to the M&O rate, which would have raised about $2.5 million additional for the district's basic operations. That didn't pass, and now the bond that is on the ballot in May is a separate deal. So that would be funded by the school district's INS rate. So the voter approved tax rate would have added additional funding to the M&O rate. The bond that's on the election for May will be funded by the INS rate, and that is to do maintenance projects, renovations, build some things, replace buses, replace technology. It's a pretty extensive bond. It covers a lot of stuff, basically touches every campus and every program in the district in some way.
Very good. And how long is that debt for? Is it like a 20-year bond or a 30-year bond? Is the proposal for that?
Yeah, I believe it's a 30-year bond.
Very good. What if the district doesn't, or the voters don't approve that? Do you see any downsides for the district, or how do y'all? Sure, you probably have plans in place to deal with it if it doesn't happen.
I think if it doesn't happen, it's going to present a lot of challenges for the district because we don't have the funding on the M&O side to be able to do things like replacing school buses. Never realized how much a school bus cost before I got on the board. We don't have the funding to do things like that, replacing technology, taking care of some of the renovations that need to be done. And so, there's going to be quite a few challenges with that, and then obviously don't have the funding to do the big construction projects, which I think are important because it keeps us competitive with other districts. It's good for our kids and making sure that they're competitive with other kids in other districts.
Understood. And speaking of kids and all that, for people that don't have kids, do y'all have an explanation as to how people benefit from a local public school district and why it is they should support these buying a school bus among other things?
You know, Public schools are important. I'm a product of public school myself, Marble Falls High School graduate, and so the kids that are in school today, there are future police officers, future attorneys, future judges, future business owners. And so I think even if you don't have kids in the district, when you support the district, you're investing in the future of our community.
As far as, can you go into a little bit of detail about the cutbacks that, because you didn't get the election vote in November for the tax vote, what sort of adjustments are being made at the district and within the schools? What sort of programs are affected?
Okay. Do you mind if I go into a little bit of context on that?
Oh, please do.
Okay. So this is going to be a real fast primer on how we've got here on school finance in the last 6 years. So I mentioned we receive funding from the state. That funding is based on what's called a daily allotment. And it's essentially the state says, we're going to give you X amount of dollars for every kid that on average attends your school throughout the year based on average daily attendance. The last time the state increased that funding number was in 2019. So 2020 happens, right? The pandemic happens. We see all this inflation. When the legislature met again in 2021 and 2023, they didn't increase that basic allotment. So the basic allotment's not going up to keep up with inflation. Now, school districts did receive a lot of money from the state via the federal government as part of all the pandemic relief funds in the form of what was called ESSER funds, ESSER. And basically, how the state used those funds was to supplant the funding that should have gone to districts for an increase in the basic allotment. So we had all these ESSER funds kind of helping to balance the budget. Well, 2 years ago, the ESSER funding ran out, and the state legislature didn't increase the daily allotment. So the district was looking at a deficit budget, which is when we went to the voters asking for the voter approved tax ratification election, again, which did not pass. So the current budget that we're operating in, the district's actually operating in a deficit budget and tapping into some of our operating reserves to be able to cover those funds. So in the upcoming budget that the board will approve, probably sometime in June, we're usually on about a June budget approval. It started out about $2.5 million in the deficit, and the district really felt it was important to go ahead and get that budget balanced so that if we do get any additional funding from the state this year, that funding could go to things like teacher salary increases, benefits, additional funding for campuses and departments. So some of that has been reducing some personnel positions, which is really unfortunate. You hate to see things like that. It was a really difficult decision the board and the administration had to make to be able to balance the budget for the kind of the greater good of the district so that any additional funding we get from the state, if we're operating with a balanced budget, any additional funding that comes from the state can go to things like salary increases, benefits, additional funding for campuses and departments.
Do you have any thoughts? I know this is sort of out of your bailiwick, but I'm sure as a school board member, you and the superintendent are watching these things. But I know in Austin, they're talking about changing our property taxes and trying to repeal some of them or roll them back a bit. Do you sense of how that's going to affect a local district, or is it just too early to tell?
Yeah, I think it's a little too early to tell on that. There's a lot of legislation. I actually watch a lot of legislation. I kind of nerd out on that stuff a little bit, honestly. But there's a lot of different things out there, and I think we're going to have to kind of get through this legislative session to see really how kind of the impact of it is going to be. Personally, I would just love on property taxes if they would just let us keep our 14.4 million in local property tax dollars, and we could fund our schools and probably give everybody a big property tax decrease if that were to happen. But I don't see the state agreeing to that one anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, most likely not, but it certainly would be a good thing. Let me look for a couple of more questions we had here. One thing is, so one of the participants was asking, what are some of the items that you're the most proud of during your 9-year tenure as a school board member?
I think the district has done a whole lot in the 9 years that I've been on the board, and I would never take credit for all that. We've had some really good board members and some really good administration during that time. Um, that's a great question. I'm proud of all of it, really. We've done some great things. I think, yeah, if I were to think about one thing, it was really probably that I'm most particularly proud about, probably the way that we really managed school throughout the pandemic. We were able to do a lot of stuff a lot of other districts weren't. We had an in-person graduation in 2020 that a lot of districts didn't do. And I think I was really proud of that. We, didn't see significant drop-offs in our students. And I think that's one. And then I think really just the commitment to kids in the district. You have an entire administration, an entire school board that's really just committed to kids and, loving and inspiring them. And I think those are kind of the things that I'm most proud about to have been a part of.
Going back to the bond question, were there any changes that were made from the original recommendation and discussions that you all had that before putting them out to the voters?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So the bond came from a recommendation. There was a community advisory committee made up of quite a few community members, and they put together the recommendation to send to the board. I actually attended, just kind of as an observer, almost every meeting of that community advisory committee. I think I missed one, and it was because just kind of goofy on my part. I put the wrong date in my calendar. But they sent a recommendation to the board, and the people running the committee were really clear. Hey, the board might make some changes to this, and so there were a few things. One dealing with additional elementary school space. In the original recommendation, it was recommended to build an additional wing on one particular elementary campus. The board kind of tweaked that a little bit and said, let's program some money in for expanding elementary schools based on growth. So wherever the growth is happening and we need additional elementary capacity, then that's where we're going to do the additional elementary capacity at. That could be at Spicewood if that's where the growth is at and it needs additional capacity. Could be at another elementary school if that's where we're seeing more growth and it needs additional capacity. So that was one. And then in the original recommendation, as I recall, there was a project to renovate the existing band hall. And when the board looked at it, we really felt like that wasn't going to suit the needs of the band really well. So we came up with a project to remodel and add on to an existing gymnasium, converting it into a band hall, which then allowed us to convert the existing band hall into a dedicated space for cheer and dance, which is the parent of a kid who graduated as a Marble Falls High School cheerleader. I was really excited about that one. And then in the original recommendation for the bond, there was turf on the baseball and softball fields, and as well as the indoor multi-purpose facility, which can be used by basically every athletic team, as well as band, cheerleaders, dance team, uh, elementary field days, things like that. And as the board got to looking at it, we realized we didn't really have a great place to put this facility where it wouldn't be a hike for kids to get to it from like locker rooms to go practice inside if there was inclement weather. And so we kind of landed on the space where the high school baseball field is at now would be a really good space for this indoor facility because it's really close to the locker rooms. And if we were in the middle of a big thunderstorm or something, kids wouldn't have to go very far in the rain to try to get from the locker rooms to practice in the indoor facility. So needing the space where the high school baseball field is now necessitated building a new baseball field in a different spot. So those were kind of, I think, the big changes that the board made once the bond recommendation came to us.
Planning for the future, have y'all seen any numbers of projections for student population, say 10 to 20 years out? I know those are always just guesses, but and looking at building any new schools anywhere in the foreseeable future.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we had a demographics study done a few years ago, and I'm not going to say that it was bad. I would say the people who did the study completely missed the mark on it. Because I think they had us by this time like at a couple thousand more kids than we're at right now. So they just completely missed the mark on that demographic study. So haven't seen anything that suggests necessarily building a new school sometime in the future. I have kind of asked like, hey, if we were to build a new school at some point in the future, what would that look like? But you haven't really seen anything that suggests that that's going to be imminent. The big thing would be, possibly adding some additional elementary school space, like I talked about with the bond, and then expanding some stuff at the high school for some of our more popular programs. Like the career and technical education at the high school. That's a hugely popular program. and it needs some more space, which fortunately the bond is going to be able to accomplish as well if that passes.
Kind of, kind of along those lines, a previous superintendent once told me that their preference was, and I'm just curious if that still kind of stands with the current district leadership, was to, for as long as possible, maintain just one high school and also for as long as possible, maintain just one middle school. And at the extent you need growth, you add to the elementary schools. And that looks like that's kind of what you're doing with your add-ons right now, but I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the preference as it is right now. We've got can still accommodate a good amount of kids at the high school. We can still accommodate a good amount of kids at the middle school. So I wouldn't see that changing in the foreseeable future. Just making room for that elementary school expansion based on wherever the growth in our community is. We're a really big district geographically, and making sure those four elementary schools all have the room that they need with people moving to town.
There was a follow-up question from one of the watchers, which is how can the district add on to the middle school with it being kind of landlocked as it is? Do you have any expansion room for it? Can always go up, I suppose, but
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to be expanding the middle school a lot in the near future. Like, our architects are really creative, and that's not my trade by any means. So I wouldn't manage to guess. So I'm sure if we needed more room at the middle school and we told somebody, hey, we find us some more room at the middle school, I'm sure they could figure out a way to do it. But we actually can accommodate a fair number of kids at the middle school right now. It's not extremely close to capacity. It's got some room for growth right there.
so should you not be reelected, do you have any life changes that would go into effect for that, or you have a thought on an exit strategy?
If I'm not reelected, I'd first say, I've served on the board 9 years. It's been a huge privilege. I appreciate the trust our communities put in me during that 9 years, especially, during some kind of difficult times. Those 9 years haven't been easy. We had a pandemic mixed in there. We've had difficulties with budgets. So I'd first say I'd appreciate the opportunity to serve our community for the last 9 years. As far as anything changes, I'm still going to be a husband. I'm still going to be a dad. I'm still going to be at every Friday night football game, um, working up in the booth with Coach Futrell. Still going to be going to all the basketball games, as many baseball and softball games as I'm able to. Still cheering on our kids and everything. Still going to be a police officer for a while. Um, position doesn't define me by any means. I think the big thing would be, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes stuff when you're on the board, just being able to have, little conversations with, the superintendent or things like that, maybe you can just not through any formal action, but maybe just, suggest a real quick idea and, you know, get something done that way. So I'd say that's the biggest change is just not being able to have those little opportunities to advocate for our district and for our community like that. But, aside from that, like still going to be me, still going to be cheering on our community and our kids the whole time.
That's one of the great things about our community. I was a graduate of the high school and middle school and elementary school in Marble Falls too. It's fun to go to the games and see old friends and see the community get behind Mustangs, and that's just a wonderful thing. Um, I don't have any other questions that people have sent in. But I'd like to give you an opportunity maybe to add a closing statement, and if a question pops up, oh, I tell you what, Gary, a question just popped up. It says, "How can we have four propositions on this bond election, and the last bond election just had one?" Kind of go through that again.
Okay. Yeah. So if we're talking about the 2018 bond, probably it just had one. So with this bond, the state has a lot of regulations on what you can put together on bond propositions. And, basically we're kind of following the advice of our bond counsel, who was working with the attorney general's office on, what the propositions for it needed to look like. So because it is so extensive, right, it touches so much. It touches every campus, it touches tons of programs, it touches athletics, like I said, career and technical education, transportation, technology. That was kind of how the district's bond counsel and the attorney general's office said we need to break it up. So, Prop A has the CTE expansion, it has the elementary school expansion, transportation, safety and security, reworking of elementary school traffic flows. I couldn't think of the word there for a second. All I was thinking is we're going to be able to fix the traffic issues out in Granite Shoals at the elementary school there. And then Prop B is technology. So Prop B is essentially we operate as a one-to-one district on technology. So every staff member and every staff and every student has a device, be it either a Chromebook or an iPad that they're able to use for learning. And every so often you got to replace those things. So Prop B would be a technology refresh. Prop C is a lot of the athletic stuff that we talked about. It's the baseball stadium, it's turf for the softball field, it's additional locker room space, and then Prop D would be the multi-purpose indoor facility. So that was just kind of how our bond counsel worked it out with the attorney general. They said, basically this is the four propositions you need to split it up in. What I've said before is I hope our voters understand as they're looking at those four propositions that all of them kind of work together. So there's things in A that affect C and D, and then C and D work real closely together. So I hope our voters take the time to understand that as they're researching it, that all of those propositions really kind of work together to accomplish what I think the district is wanting to accomplish with this bond.
Very good. Okay, now I'll give you a chance to kind of close it, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Again, just thank you for the questions. Thank you to the members of our community that took the time to send in some questions. As I said, it's been a real huge privilege of mine being able to serve on the school board for the last 9 years. It's something that I take very seriously, that I'm very invested in. It's a commitment for me. Every time before when a meeting packet comes out, I take the time to go through everything in it, make a list of any questions that I want to ask. And I tend to be the member on the board that asks a lot of questions about things. And it's because, really, I want to understand because in my head, if I've got a question about this, a member of our community might have a question about something. So I want to be able to answer those questions for our community. And that honestly doesn't make me incredibly popular with some people. I think some people would kind of rather there just be a consensus and no questions and just move on, but that's not my approach, and that's never been my approach. I am the guy that asks a lot of questions. I'm the guy that's not afraid to vote against something if it's something that I don't feel is right or that I don't believe in, and I've shown that before. I'm always going to do what I think is the right thing and what I think is the right thing for our community. And I appreciate the trust that our community's had in me over the last 9 years and looking forward to continuing if that's how it works out.
All right. Well, thank you very much for participating in this. And again, we gave Mr. Edwards the opportunity to join us too, and he declined, but that's fine. It's honestly, I know it's no fun to go through elections. I've gone through a few myself, but it's not a bad thing to have to face the voters and once again kind of get a read of how everybody feels and kind of get a sense that they still agree with you. So I wish you well, and keep in mind again, as for those of y'all watching out there, that I'm not making an endorsement in this race. I just uh, providing this forum for the candidates to give some answers. So wish them both very well and good luck. And Gary, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, everybody have a great rest of the Palm Sunday.
Have a good one. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.